This class will give you a big picture of the whole Bible, be an overview, so it'll be beneficial for those who don't know anything about the Bible. It'll give you a framework for understanding the whole general story of the Bible. And for those who've read the Bible a lot over the years, it'll help you connect what might be in your mind isolated stories and help you see how they all fit together. Okay, so Roman numeral 1, Deborah Prairie, could you read that for us? A little paragraph beside the pyramid.
Jesus is the pinnacle of the Bible. If the Bible were a mountain, then Jesus would be the summit, and the Old Testament would be everything below him. He's the peak to which all the rocks point.
Okay, so Jesus is the pinnacle, and maybe more precisely below that, Jesus and the good news about his kingdom and the whole New Testament. All of that is the pinnacle, because that's what the New Testament is all about. And the Old Testament is the base of that mountain. So you see the little diagram there. So because of that, it's easy to think that the Old Testament is unimportant. Right? Generally speaking, most people think the New Testament is much more important than the Old Testament. But just like the peak of a pyramid cannot stand without the base of the pyramid, Jesus and the gospel about him and his kingdom, that cannot be understood without the Old Testament. So, letter A says, the more we understand the Old Testament, the greater our capacity for understanding who Jesus is and what he did for us. That's the reason we need to learn about the Old Testament. The other reason we need to learn, the other reason for studying Genesis, which is what we're going to do today, is because the New Testament, and especially the book of Matthew, assumes the reader already knows Genesis very well. That's just assumed. So those are the reasons we are going to study Genesis today. Because if you don't understand Genesis, you won't understand Matthew. All right, so Roman numeral 2 is Genesis 1 through 11 answers these questions. Who is God? What humans were meant to be, and what humans did, and what we are now, and the outworkings of our wickedness. Human achievement, pride, ambition, and aggression. Okay, so we're going to look at the first one first. Who is God? Let's see. Kathy, could you read the red text in the box there? Genesis 1:1.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
Okay, so if you're reading the Bible for the first time, that's the first sentence you come to. Now, according to Genesis 1:1, who is God?
Creator.
The creator of everything. Very good. And because of that, because of the fact that he's the creator, what are some other things we can learn about him from that verse? And from the fact that he's the creator?
He was there before anything.
Okay, good. He was pre-existent. Very good. What else?
He created heaven and earth.
Mm-hmm. And maybe along with pre-existent is that he exists. That's just assumed. It's not proved, it's just assumed. In the ancient world, there were no atheists until the Greeks, and then there was a few atheists. What else about God can you learn from that? There's two other things, probably more than that. But what's that?
He's spirit.
Okay, he is spirit. Good. So he is the world that he made, that's matter, he is separate from that. So, so if this is creation, This is God. This is everything else. This is me. This is a rock. This is a star. And God is something else. There's lots of ways to categorize things, right? So you might categorize this group into men and women. But then if we had men, women, and rocks, we would put men and women in the same category and rocks in a separate category, right? Because they're more similar, right? A man is more similar to a woman than he is to a rock, right? Yes. Yeah. Right. But the biggest separation that there is of all categories is between God and everything that was made. So, in one sense, I have more in common with a rock than I do with God. Now, there are some things that me and God have in common that a rock doesn't. Like we can both talk, we can both think, we're both alive, and a rock is none of those. However, there's actually more in common because me and a rock had a beginning. There was a time when we did not exist. And me and a rock, if you think about intelligence, the difference between a rock is 0 and I'm whatever. The difference between me and a rock is negligible compared to the difference between me and God and His intelligence. So that's the biggest category of all, that God is separate. Now, this is super important because most Christians read the Bible assuming they basically know who God is. And often what we do is we project ourselves onto God. God's probably like me, except perfect and more powerful. Anyone ever been guilty of thinking about God like that?
Well, doesn't He say that we were made in His image?
It does, yeah. We're going to explore that today, what that means. But the problem is we want to get who God is from the Bible and not from our own ideas. Right? Because if everybody thinks that, God's like me except more powerful and doesn't sin, then everyone is going to have a different idea of who God is. We want to learn from the Bible. So this is a really important concept. In fact, God very clearly says, I'm not like you. My ways are not your ways. My thoughts are not your thoughts. He is completely other to us.
Except He says we're made in His image.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we're gonna get to that. But we have to start understanding we're all created, this whole world, everything we see and are, we're created, and He's the creator. That's how the Bible starts. That's the groundwork. Now, once we find out we're made in His image, we have to talk about what that means. Okay. Another thing we didn't mention that we learned from this verse is that God is powerful. But we need to move on. Okay, so what are some things from this verse we can learn about ourselves that we haven't discussed already? Well, we are
spirit. We have body, soul, and spirit.
well, okay, fair, except that we don't get that from this verse.
Okay.
We will get that later in the Bible, you're right.
That we wouldn't have existed if it happened.
That's right, we were made by someone. Not by natural processes, by someone.
So God is a someone?
He is a someone. He is a person. Not a human, but a person. He has a personality. And I want to know about His personality. What makes Him happy, what makes Him angry. There's all kinds of things like that that the Bible explains to us. So, we're made by someone, therefore, you are not the center of the universe. We're born sinful, assuming that we are the center of the universe. And hopefully, through the process of growing up and getting made fun of at school and everything that you go through, you learn, I'm not the center of the universe.
He was in the beginning.
That's right. Yes. So, we are not the center of the universe, and we are owned. If I build something, like my grandfather built a canoe, I still have it. I use it on Lake Griffin. Right? Nobody can come. Nobody could. When my grandfather built that, nobody could come to him and be like, "Hey, that's mine." He would say, "No, I made this, so it's mine." Right? That's the most basic concept of ownership. So we are owned. And maybe we are accountable to someone. That is only hinted at here. We get that more explicit in the next chapter, a page over, when Adam and Eve are given tasks. Okay, so that is the basis. The fact that we are owned by God, accountable to Him, that's the basis for why we can talk about sin. If you go up to someone and say, "You shouldn't do that because the Bible says it's wrong," okay, who cares? Poor Richard's Almanac says something else is wrong. Why should I care about what a book says is right or wrong? Because you were made by someone. Okay, let's turn to page 2. Let's see what else we can learn about God from the rest, not the rest of this chapter, but the next few paragraphs. Let's see. Bronwyn, could you read this nice and loud for us? And as she's reading, I might stop you partway through, but look for repeated concepts that might teach us something about God. Go ahead.
Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and He separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness He called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. And God said, "Let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water." So God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it. And it was so. God called the vault sky. And there was evening, and there was morning, the second day. And God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear." And it was so. God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters He called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, according to their various kinds." And it was so. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed in it according to their kinds. And God saw.
Oh yeah, just finish that verse.
And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the third day.
Good. Okay, we'll get to the next day in a moment. Okay, has anyone noticed any repeated ideas in what Bronwyn just read?
A lot of water.
A lot of water. Okay, very good. There is a lot at the beginning. We're going to talk about why that is shortly.
There's evening and morning.
Well, God, and several of these verses, it ends with, "And God saw that it was good."
Okay, so you get that the creation is good, which is going to raise questions for any reader, because all of us have lived in this world and seen that it's not good. But so creation is good, we learn from this, and that God's the one who saw. That's repeated over. God saw that it was good. God determines what is good and what's not.
It's weird that there's evening and morning and there's no sun.
Right. It's weird that there's evening and morning and there's no sun. Yeah, that's a really good observation. Let's save that for the next day, because that's when He makes the sun. We'll talk about that then. But everybody heard that? It's weird that there's evening and morning but no sun.
And God said.
A lot of God said. This God is a talking God. Not only is God saying things, but he's also naming things. He makes this vault and he calls it the sky. He makes...
Do you think God was lonely before he made man?
I do not think that God was lonely. Not at all. God is completely self-sufficient, but a lot of that comes from other parts of the Bible.
He wanted to have communion with man, though, once he made him, right? I mean, with him in the garden.
Yes.
I mean, that's where God was coming up with man.
Yeah, I think that God likes or enjoys fellowship and love with human beings, but that doesn't follow that he was lonely before that.
So he's not like a human. When he doesn't get it, he's not like if a human doesn't have love.
But he did have love. He did have love within himself, between the Father and the Son, and the Son and the Spirit, and the Spirit and the Father. But you don't get that from these verses, though.
There was a lot of light.
Yeah, and then there's no source for the light until verse 14. Good. Yeah, God is naming things. And then, anyone notice anything else repeated?
Let there.
Yeah, he's calling things into existence by his own word or his own will. He doesn't do anything to make it like we have to do.
Dick just said God was the light.
God was the light. Well, it doesn't say that here, but yeah, that's a good point.
I don't think God was lonely, but he did create us for his pleasure.
That's true. Yes, but in the same way that you could enjoy something, like if I brought you an orange right now, you might be like, "Oh, this is nice. I wasn't craving an orange. I wasn't hungry, but I like this orange, and I'll eat it." You see what I mean? So just because he maybe enjoys something or appreciates something doesn't mean that he was deficient before that. That's very important.
And he had other creative beings.
Well, yeah, there's some question as to when that happened. That may have all happened right here in verse 1. Yes?
I'm wondering about the word vault. What translation is that?
Well, this is the NIV. The thing is, when you go outside and you look around, you see land, and it looks like a big blue dome over top of you. That was the way ancient man thought of the world. The land must be really big because you never come to that wall that is the vault.
It's funny, I've never heard it called vault, and I've
Yeah.
read the NIV.
Yeah.
I just didn't.
Yeah.
So that's no original.
Well, vault is actually an English word that we use rather than firmament. I mean, that's not a word. It might as well not be an English word because nobody says it and that speaks English. Firmament, like the King James said. That word doesn't do us any good because that's not a word we've ever heard anyone use. I've never heard anyone ever, except for in the Bible, say the word firmament. You know, like a carpenter, I'm going to build a little firmament right here. Right, so vault is at least an English word that we have some concept of. Okay, there's some kind of thing. Yes?
Yeah, ESV says it expands.
Yeah, a big thing. Yeah. It's a little vague. Okay, but anything else repeated though in this? Because we've got God talking, we've got water at the beginning, and then God talking, and what did you say?
Let them.
Yeah, we got that. God naming things. We got this morning and evening, day 1, day 2, day 3. We got numbering happening and naming.
Light and darkness.
Yeah, okay, so he's separating. He separates the water from the water, and then down in 14, he separates the day from the night, the light from the dark. What do all these things tell us about God? Oh, and according to their kind, I want to make these trees, and they'll have seeds, these plants, and they'll reproduce according to their kinds. The oak tree will have other oak trees, He's not like an oak tree seed will make a watermelon.
He's organized?
He's organizing things.
His word is powerful because
Yeah.
speaks it.
He
His
speaks
word
it
is
into
powerful.
existence, yes. So that's a very important concept, that what did it say at the beginning how the world was when God started making it? It was, okay, so void or empty and
Darkness.
dark and formless. Now the earth was formless and empty or void. And then he goes through, it was formless, and he forms it, and he fills it. We can't spend too much time, but this days are very logical progression. It was formless and empty, and then he forms it, and he fills it. He's separating. The reason that water was mentioned so much at the beginning, before God started forming this world, it was just a watery chaos. That's the some people who grew up by the ocean, they love the ocean, it's a very peaceful thing to them, but that's not the way ancient people thought of the ocean. The ocean was scary, the ocean was chaotic, the ocean was unpredictable. If there's a big storm that sweeps down on you on land, the air is moving around a lot, but at least the land's still. But if you're out on the sea and a storm comes, the sea itself is moving. Yeah. Okay, also, if there's a predator on land, you can see it. Oh, there it is. There's a lion. It's running at me. But if you're on the sea, if you're out swimming in the sea, something can just out of nowhere, and you can't see them at all. There's stuff under there. I mean, we gotta try to break down some of our modern concepts of, oh yes, I have an encyclopedia, so I know everything that's in the sea. Right? You have to think about the chaotic. I mean, Isaiah said, the wicked are like the waves of the sea which cast up muck and mire. It was not a pleasant concept. So, the sea was a symbol of chaos and unpredictability and wildness. Nothing wasn't like the land, at least this land will be here tomorrow, and in 1,000 years it'll still be here, but the ocean is different water every hour. Okay, so a chaotic world, and God is ordering it and saying, I'm going to separate this from this, separate these waters, I'm going to separate this, the day from the night, I'm going to make these plants, they'll reproduce in an orderly fashion. He's numbering the days. And then we get to the next paragraph, and you'll see that even more explicitly. Pat Yealy, could you read that last paragraph in red on page 2?
And God said, let there be lights in the vault of the sky, to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times and days and years.
Okay, pause a second. What are the lights up in the vault? What are those lights for?
To light the earth.
Well, what did it say in that verse?
Separate day and night.
Separate day and night, and what else?
Seasons.
To tell time. So that we can know, okay, this is a new time, this is a new month, this is a new year.
Is that what they mean in there by, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times? Is that seasons, or would that be a...
To mark holidays, to mark different things, yes. So the purpose of those lights is to tell time. That's very orderly, isn't it?
Yes.
So you see that this creation is becoming progressively more organized. That's why early on there's day and night, there's light, and now it's getting regularized and organized. And also, remember it says he forms and fills. The days are arranged that he forms something and then he fills it. He makes the vault and he fills it with stars. He makes the earth and he fills it with plants. Like that. The 6 days of creation are organized in that way. Okay, now Pat, keep going. Sorry I stopped you.
That's okay. Is it 15?
Yes.
And let them be lights in the vault of the sky to give light on earth. Excuse me. And it was so. God made 2 great lights, the greater light to govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. God sent them in the vault of the sky to give light on earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the fourth day.
I always wondered why he said the greater light and the lesser light. Why couldn't he just say the sun and moon?
They're stars.
There are stars. So I finally learned that in the ancient world back then, the name of the sun god was sun. And the name of the moon god was moon. They were names also. So Moses, under inspiration of the Holy Spirit, purposely and deliberately avoided using the name of these other gods, because every other creation myth had one god making other gods, and we got all the gods. This doesn't work that way. And he avoids, he says, it's not a person, that bright light and that dim light at night. They aren't people, they're lights to light this up, to tell time. They're created things, just like you and me. Don't worship them.
Okay, modern people know that the moon actually gets its light from the sun. Okay, so the moon is not a light, but did they dumb it down because they didn't know?
It's not dumbed down.
Well, I mean,
It is a light. I mean, it gives us light, doesn't it?
well, it gives us light, but it's not the light. It's not a light.
It still functions to give us light. He's telling us the function of these things. Here's what I made, and here's why I made it. Here's what it's for. It does give us light. Now, learning the scientific ways in which it gives us light is interesting, but it's not important for knowing how to live.
Why it was meant? No, that's true.
Yeah. It's not important to knowing how to commune with God, the ways in which it happens. You know, there's a lot of people that I don't know how my phone calls someone. I don't know how the signal goes to some tower and to a satellite to this person, and I'm talking to my friend. But I do like talking to my kids. I do like talking to my friends. That's the important thing. So the ways in which things happen isn't always important. And even now, scientists still don't understand light. But that's another issue. Okay. All right. So God is organizing things into kinds, forming it and filling it. One thing that we didn't really get to is how much creation teems with life. The lands, life, the waters teem with life. He makes 3 areas: the land, the water, and the sky. And he fills the sky with birds, and he fills the water with living things, and he fills the land with vegetation and with creatures. So the concept of life here, and we didn't finish the creation story, but we don't need to, but the concept of the life is really important because it teaches us that what is good, and God calls these things good, what is good is more than just morally good. It's good in as far as it is like the Creator. And the Creator is alive, and so life is good. And the Creator is orderly, and so order is good. And if you look around at creation, this is not explicitly stated here, but there's beauty, and beauty is good because the Creator is beautiful. In the truest sense of beauty. We don't have time to unpack that, but so goodness, the root of goodness is all about what is good, right? Love is good because God is love. Holiness is good because God is holy. That's where we get.
You know, it's all beyond our comprehension.
It is.
It's beyond our comprehension. Creation is beyond. When I think of land, growing up, I never thought that there'd be other
Yeah.
Other continents, you know.
Yeah.
We live
And
here,
that's,
and this is what it is.
and that's really important. That's one of the things we learn from this, is that God is so far beyond us. He gives us writings for us to understand, and what we're supposed to learn from that is that we can't understand him. My ways are not your ways, my thoughts are not your thoughts. As far as the heavens are above the earth, so far are my thoughts above your thoughts. So we can learn some things about God, but one of the things we learn is that he is vast, beyond our comprehension. Very good. Let's turn to page 3. Okay, Nancy, could you read the blue box at the top of page 3?
Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all wild animals, and over all creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground."
Okay, so from this text, what do we learn about what humans were made to be?
In God's image.
Okay, good. Images of God.
And rulers.
And rulers, good. And so we are miniature pictures, like statues, right? If there's a statue of me, it would be an image of me. It's not as cool as me, it can't do as much as me, but in some way it's like me. So in some way we are like God, and one of the ways, the very first way, is that we are made to rule. The way God rules the universe, we're supposed to rule the animals, the birds, and the fish.
You're supposed to reproduce.
Yes, we were made for love and relationships with each other, and that includes marriage and sex, because that's a way in which we reflect God, because the harmony between the Trinity is reflected in the harmony of human relationships, particularly in marriage, but in all relationships. So in the same way that 3 equals 1 in the Trinity, 2 equals 1 in marriage, and to a lesser degree in friendships. So in other words, did you notice that this is the first place you get plurality of God? Now, you might have heard someone say that the word for God is plural. That's poor Hebrew when people say that. That word does have a plural ending, the word for God, Elohim. But mathematics has a plural ending. But that doesn't mean that there's more than one mathematic. Right? It's a big concept. That's why God has the plural ending. You don't really get plurality within God until verse 26. Let us make man. And of course, when people were first reading this, when Moses wrote it, probably, that was strange, but it wasn't understood. Now, looking back through the lens of the New Testament, we're like, oh, I know exactly about the plurality of God. But the point is, in the same way that there is plurality and oneness in God, there is plurality and oneness of human beings because we reflect him. We are images of him. There might be other ways in which we are images of God, but these are the ones given here when it says it. So we are, as a race, human beings as a race, are made to be social, to have relationships. And one last way in which we reflect God is that we are not only to have love and relationship with each other, but we're to have love and relationship with God himself. Right? Just like God the Father fellowships with God the Son, I'm supposed to be like the Son in fellowship with the Father. So that's what we were made to be. Unfortunately, if you've ever met another person, you know that it doesn't really work out quite right, ever. Okay, let's look at chapter 2. Nancy, you did so good. Can you read chapter 2?
The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. And the Lord God commanded the man, "You are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die." And the Lord God said, "It is not good for man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him."
Okay, so there we have the first not good in the Bible. Something is not good. The vault was not, its goodness or not goodness wasn't mentioned. It was the only thing in creation that wasn't mentioned, whether or not it was good. But here we have an explicit not good. So the importance of human relationships is re-emphasized here. And there is one more note about what we were made to be here in this green box.
Farmers.
Yeah, we are given jobs, tasks, to work the garden and take care of it. So Adam and Eve lived in paradise with perfect harmony. They were the only couple to ever have a perfect marriage. Didn't last long, but they had it. We don't know how long it lasted, but and how many restrictions did they have? One restriction. One restriction. Okay. And the restriction really was to trust God's judgment about what was good and evil. God had told them, these things are good. This is what you're supposed to do. This is how you're supposed to be. This is what, everything is for you. I give you all these plants. I give you all this. I make you. It's not good for you to be alone. I want you to be together. All these things. And you need to trust my judgment about what's good and evil.
You think they knew what die meant?
I don't know.
Nobody's ever died, so.
Nobody had ever died. And it's hard to say because they immediately appear in this world with a full vocabulary. Right? Like they know how to talk. So God obviously supplied a vocabulary of terms, but they certainly, let me put it this way. My kids know what the word die means. But after you lose someone and you go through grief share, then you really know what die means. And they don't know. And I'm thankful that they don't know yet. One of my biggest fears is that one of us is going to die, me or my wife, and my kids are going to have to learn what it means, what death really means. So, they certainly don't know it that way. And they probably know what evil is, but they don't know it in the experiential way. Okay, so their one restriction is just trust me on what's good and evil. Don't try to know it for yourself. Let's turn to page 4. Okay. Our colors for our boxes of words get progressively more ominous. Yeah. Darla, could you read that black box, chapter 3, the top of page 4?
Now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden?" The woman said to the serpent, "We may eat fruit from the trees in the garden, but God did say, you must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it or you will die. You will not certainly die." The serpent said to the woman, "For God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband, who was with her, and he ate it.
So, they live in paradise, and they have one restriction. All they have to do is trust God's judgment about what is good and evil. But instead of living in submission to their Maker's authority, instead of living in harmony and love with each other and with God, they took the fruit. Now, some people assume that the fruit symbolizes sex. I met people and they assume that the fruit is a metaphor for sex. How do we know for sure that that interpretation is wrong?
Well, they don't know.
Because
Well, they
tells us
didn't
to
know.
become one.
Yes, they were already commanded to have sex.
Right.
Yes. Yes. So,
That's sex. Okay, back up. I got lost.
in chapters 1 and 2, Adam and Eve are commanded to have sex by God. So, that proves that taking the fruit is not a metaphor for them having sex. Some people think that the tree that they eat the fruit, that's just a metaphor for having sex when God didn't want them to. That interpretation is wrong. Sex was good for Adam and Eve. It was righteous and holy. Does that make sense?
Now, are you talking before eating the fruit or after? Because before the fruit, did they have sex? No.
They were commanded to.
And it was not, well, it wasn't a sin at that time.
It wasn't as what?
It wasn't considered a sin at that time.
They're married, so it's not a sin ever for them.
Right.
He said to go and multiply.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
I had never heard of that before, so that,
Yeah. But anyway, so some people think that that's what that's about. Now, they obviously haven't read it very closely. But most people don't read it closely. But it's important to bring up for this reason. The reason they think that is because in their minds, the essence of sin is forbidden pleasure. That's what they think. If you talk to somebody, they wouldn't be able to articulate it probably, but if you had a conversation, eventually they get down to, I guess what sin really is forbidden pleasure. But that's not the essence of sin. The truth is, forbidden pleasure is never as good as lawful pleasure. Although Hollywood tries really hard to make forbidden pleasure seem better. Every romantic comedy starts out when they're with someone else and then they leave their partner and get with somebody new. And that's what the whole plot is. But, okay, if the essence of sin is not forbidden pleasure, then what is the essence of sin? Rebellion, yes. Yes, rebellion. It's going your own way. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way. So even if your way is being a really great person, everyone's like, wow, what a great neighbor, what a kind person. That's sin. Because you're going your own way. You're not going God's way. And that's why people are like, I don't understand how unsaved people can be nice people. Well, it's sin for them to go their own way. And the way they choose is to be a great guy. But that's a sinful path. It's strange, isn't it? But this is what they're saying. You know what, God? Thanks for the Bible and all your good advice, but I don't really care. I want to do my thing. I think my idea of being a good neighbor is better than your plan about having your son die. I don't really care that he died. Do you see how rebellious that is?
But we then are trying to make ourselves like God, which is exactly how Eve was tempted to be like God.
Exactly. That is.
He also not only said don't eat it, but he said don't touch it. Yeah.
So did he say don't touch it, or did the devil plant that
Well,
in the mind?
I'm going by what we wrote right here.
God says to Adam, don't eat it. And now Eve in chapter 3 knows about this. So we can assume that Adam is the one who told her. We don't know for sure. Now, did Adam add something or did she add something?
Satan added it.
Satan does not add anything about touching. Eve adds that.
No, I'm talking about obedience, in the fact that, if in reading this version, it said, and you must not touch it or you will die. And so, that, I know that, but what I'm saying is sin in the world today, we don't want to touch because it goes farther and we get farther away from God, was where I was going with that. You know what I'm saying?
Not exactly.
Okay. If I say there's something sinful, okay, and I know I'm not supposed to do that, but I just touch it and start to do it because of that, then if I don't touch it, I'm not going to be sinning. You see what I'm saying?
So you're saying that Eve adds an extra barrier to protect herself? Here's the thing. It's not a sin to touch the fruit. God says don't eat it. But certainly if you're touching it and feeling it,
Right.
you're going to be tempted to take a bite.
That's what I'm saying.
Yes. However,
It's the however that gets me in trouble.
However, many people have gone down the road of saying, well, if God doesn't want me to drink, then maybe I won't even go in a bar.
Or why did he give me the alcohol?
No, well, my point is, they'll put up an extra barrier. I'm not even going to go in a place that has a bar. I won't go in Applebee's because they have a bar. Okay? You know what? I'm not ever going to go out to eat at all because some restaurants serve alcohol. So what people tend to do is to make more and more barriers. But what they're doing is they're taking what God said and adding man's things to it. That's what the Pharisees did, like crazy. God says don't work, let's define work. If you stick a pin in your shirt, you're sewing. That's work. That's a sin on the Sabbath. The Pharisees and legalistic conservative Christians like Baptists have done that. It's very tempting. So is that what Eve is doing? Is that what Adam was trying to do for her? I'm not sure. But she certainly adds to God's command here. But the fall, what it's all about, is really the essence of sin, and that is determining for yourself what's good. All through chapter 1, God saw that it was good. God saw that it was good. God saw that it was good. And now in 3:6, when the woman saw that it was good, she says, yes, I know what God said, but I can see for myself that fruit is good for food, pleasing to the eyes, and desirable for gaining wisdom. Side note, that's not exactly the same, but it's in the same vein as 1 John when it says, whoever loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. All that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. The lust of the flesh, desirable for food, the lust of the eyes, pleasing to the eyes, and the pride of life, desirable for gaining wisdom, to feel important, to feel in control, all that kind of things. It's all about pride. So the essence of sin is rebellion, going your own way, determining for yourself what's good and evil, instead of just submitting to what God says. We assert our own will above God. So really, it's de-godding God. We kick God off the throne and climb up onto it ourselves. In our hearts, we do that. We say, I will run my own life. I will go my own way. And if you think about it, it doesn't matter what your own way is. Even if your own way is being a really good person, it's your way. That's why you can have unsaved people be very nice people, because they're saying, God, I don't care about your little advice. I'm running my own life, and I'm going my own way. And my own way might be being nice. My own way might be being terrible, being a serial killer. It could be whatever it is, you go your way. You run your own life. You've put yourself in the place of God. That's the essence of what sin is. It's rebellion. And now the results. When we humans choose to detach ourselves from God, who is the source of life and goodness, the results are very sad. The results are we brought death into this world, and guilt and shame and division. So what is the very first thing they do after they sin? The very first thing they do is they sew fig leaves to cover themselves. So they, what does that show? What does it show that they cover themselves? Right, shame, distrust, a barrier between each other. They hide, they cover themselves, so there's a barrier. They can't be totally open physically, emotionally, spiritually. Incidentally, that is the first example of human craft. The first technology, the first invention is a needle. The first craftsmanship is sewing. They sew fig leaves together. So immediately after sin, you get technology. And Genesis looks very distrusting at technology, as you see throughout the book. But one of the big ones is here. It's not weaving, it's sewing. And then what's the very second thing they do after they sin? That's right, they hide. They hide from God. What does that show? Yes, fear, shame, division. So not only do they have broken harmony with each other, they have broken harmony with God. That's what their sin has brought into this world. Page 5. Page 5, there's a chart at the top. So the stories, the Adam and Eve story, they had a perfect world, they sinned. And then God sent judgment. Cain and Abel story number 2. They sinned, God gave judgment, gave the judgment to Cain. And then the civilization, the age of heroes, all the violence, everything that was going on during that time. They sinned terribly, and God brought judgment, the great judgment, the flood. And then Babel. Babel's really the same thing. It's pride, just in a different form. It's a less violent way. Perhaps mankind had learned their lesson. They all knew about the flood. But they find a less violent way to assert themselves, to deify themselves. We will reach heaven. We're going to build a tower. And it's through technology. They have this new technology of bricks. So they don't have to go look for stones or shape stones. They can make them, bake them. Now with this new technology, what we can do, we can accomplish, we can reach heaven. So instead of God's intention, which was to stand in awe and look up in wonder at the heavens and say, wow, God is so great. That's infinitely far above me. God is so great. Instead of that, they say, I can reach that. It's the sin of Adam and Eve all over again. I can decide for myself what's good. It's another way to reach the heavens on their own, to deify themselves, to de-God God. It's all about being independent from God. It's about making a name for themselves. It's all about glory. They say we're going to make a name for ourselves, but they're seeking their own glory, not God's glory. And God sends judgment again, which is what? The languages. He splits their languages and scatters them. So all 4 stories in this primordial age, this prehistoric age, Genesis 1 through 11, are all about humans asserting themselves, taking from God what should have been his. Judgment, honor, glory, a name, all that should have been God's, and they take it. So to sum up, God makes man, man rebels and spirals down from there in a cycle of sin and judgment and sin and judgment. But after every judgment, there is mercy. After Adam and Eve's judgment, God makes them better clothes. After Cain's judgment, he says, my punishment is too great, and God puts the mark on him to protect him. When he's going to wipe out the face of the earth because everyone's too violent, he provides the ark and saves one family of humans and animals. I'm thankful because otherwise none of us would be here. So that mercy there with that. And then here, the mercy is not wiping them out again. The mercy is just splitting their languages at Babel. And then one other word about the mercy after Adam and Eve, not just the clothes, but also the promise that someday the seed of the woman would crush the serpent's head. So defeat evil at the source. So the cycle then is sin, judgment, mercy, sin, judgment, mercy, sin, judgment, mercy, over and over and over again. If you read the rest of the Old Testament, it's just that cycle over and over and over again. And if you read the Old Testament, you come to think, well, I guess that's just what it is, right? It's just going to be one eternal cycle of sin, judgment, and mercy. But you would start to wonder, is that going to go on forever, or will there ever be an ultimate judgment and an ultimate mercy? And yes, the ultimate judgment is the cross, where God's wrath was poured out at all of human sin. His wrath was poured out on Jesus. And the ultimate mercy is the cross, where our sins are atoned for and paid for and washed away. We can be made new. Thank God for the cross.